everyone, welcome back to Plot Portal. So we are on to episode 7 and we're on part 3 of delving into Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. We are comparing the books to the films, looking at what was missed out, changed, added in the films, like how they differed from the books, and then looking ahead to the Harry Potter TV series that's due to come out in 2026 and looking at what we hope they do with it. What do we hope they stay true to that the films didn't do? What are those things we hope to see from the books that we missed out on in the films? So we have done 2 parts just for Prisoner of Azkaban already, and this is the 3rd and should be final part. A lot happens in Prisoner of Azkaban, even though it's one of the shorter books and shorter films. A lot happens in it, more so than you realise, because you basically have the whole film and then it goes back in time and does everything again. So there's a lot, hence why we've had to split this into so many parts. But we've got some interesting things to go through, so I'm just going to get straight into it. Before I do though, if you're enjoying this podcast, then don't forget to subscribe, and if you enjoy this video, please don't forget to give it a huge thumbs up. That'd be very much appreciated. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss future episodes. We are on to the part in Prisoner of Azkaban where hell starts to break loose, where they go into the Shrieking Shack, everything happens, and they go back in time. So really into like the drama, the high stake moments in Prisoner of Azkaban. In the films, Sirius breaks Ron's leg because he grabs onto Ron's leg and pulls it. This doesn't actually happen in the books. In the books, it's the other way. Sirius is sort of pulling him, I think, by his like top or something, and then Ron uses his leg to try and stop himself from being dragged into the Whomping Willow. He like hooks it onto a branch, but because Sirius is still pulling him, his leg snaps. So Sirius isn't actually directly responsible for snapping Ron's leg. He doesn't grab his leg with his teeth. The real way Ron's leg actually breaks is because he's like using it to try and not be dragged into the tree. Very little difference, but actually I always think like, oh, it makes Sirius seem so horrible in the film that he like broke Ron's leg. I mean, he still technically did, but a little bit more indirectly in the book. Something else with Ron is in the films, when they're in the Shrieking Shack, he's really depicted as being like scared, cowering in the corner, almost crying and everything. Whereas in the books, he's much more like, he really tries and like stands up for himself and his friend. Even though like he's literally got a broken leg and can't physically stand, he still tries. He's like, you'll have to go through me and all of this, and really tries to put up a fight, and it shows real bravery and courage in him. And I've spoken about this in previous episodes, that Ron is done a bit of a disservice. They sort of dumb him down and don't really give him as much spotlight and limelight in the films. And that's just one example of that. One of the many examples where they sort of make him seem weaker than he is. And in the books, he really puts on a really good sort of fight. And it's a shame that they didn't show that in the film. So I hope they do portray that well in the series. Because like in the books, it's actually Hermione that's more nervous and scared, and Ron that's being brave. And that's almost switched in the films. And as I said before, there's a lot of those cases where things are actually taken off Ron and given to Hermione. So yeah, hope that doesn't happen in the series. Now, another actually quite big difference is in the films, it shows Harry as seeing Peter Pettigrew. He's sort of wandering the corridors at night. He sees Peter Pettigrew on the Marauders map and is trying to follow it and everything. And you do actually in that moment hear like a mouse in the background, and that's a bit of a clue of Peter Pettigrew's in disguise. But in the books, this doesn't happen. In the books, Harry doesn't see Peter Pettigrew, and he doesn't go to Lupin saying, I saw someone who appeared to be dead. And that doesn't happen at all. The way it happens in the books is, so Lupin confiscates the map for a different reason. I think it's because it's when Harry goes into Hogsmeade and gets caught by Draco, and then Lupin saves Harry from Snape's wrath. But he's like, look, I'm ashamed of you still, and takes the map off him. And as a result, basically then Lupin's using the map and everything, and he looks at the map on the night of Buckbeak's execution. And he later on, he says to Harry, like, oh, I had a feeling that you would end up going to Hagrid's to be with him when that happened, so I had a look at the map, saw you there, but then also saw Peter Pettigrew. Because obviously they find Peter Pettigrew, aka Scabbers, in Hagrid's hut. So in the books, it's actually Lupin that first sees Peter Pettigrew on the map. Harry never sees him on there. Only Lupin does. And then when he turns up to the Shrieking Shack later, he's like, look, I, still believed Sirius to be guilty until literally a couple of hours ago or less than that, when I saw Peter Pettigrew on the map. So This is actually quite important because it means that Harry actually has even less sort of context to go on in that moment in the Shrieking Shack. And as a reader in that moment, you really are unsure what's going on and who's right or wrong. You really think Lupin's gone evil for a minute. I think you do as well in the films, because I always been thinking, oh, Lupin's being mean. But in the books, you also get that. Like, you really feel like, oh, wait, what's happening here? Is Lupin really bad or something? Because we haven't had that extra context about Harry seeing Pettigrew on the map, because that doesn't happen in the books. And it just makes much more sense then as to why Lupin turns up there, because I don't actually think they explain in the films why Lupin ends up going to the Shrieking Shack, but they do explain it in the book. It's because he was just looking at the map, because he knew Harry, Ron and Hermione would probably go to see Hagrid. He saw Pettigrew was also in the hut with them and is like, what the hell? And that's why he then follows them and goes into the shack. So I actually think it makes everything much more clear. It's all explained much more, why Lupin's there, why he realised about Pettigrew, everything. It just makes much more sense. The fact he sees Pettigrew for himself with his own eyes, he's not just taking Harry's word for it. So I hope that the series stay true to the book's version of events of that. Even though it might not seem majorly different, I think it just makes much more sense the way it happens in the books. Next, Snape getting into the Shrieking Shack. Again, there's just a lot more involved with this. So basically, when Harry, Ron and Hermione went to see Hagrid, in the books, they take the invisibility cloak and they hide under it. Something, again, that's missed out in the films. They just run there and then they have to hide and all that. Whereas in the books, they use the invisibility cloak, which makes sense. It's something you would assume they would use. But in the rush, when Sirius drags Ron into the Whomping Willow, into the Shrieking Shack, Harry drops the cloak in order to run after Ron to try and save him. Because basically what happens is they're all under the cloak. Ron has Scabbers. Scabbers is like fighting. Ron accidentally drops him, runs after him, and then Sirius is there, drags him under. Then Harry and Hermione, in their rush, drop the cloak, run after him, and just forget about it. And it's left just on the grass outside the Whomping Willow. And Snape, when he follows Ron, Harry, and Hermione and realises they've gone in the Whomping Willow, he picks up the cloak that they have discarded and he uses the cloak to go into the Whomping Willow. And there is literally like a scene in the book and they're like, oh, the door moved of its own accord, which is really weird. And it is Snape, and they think, oh, it's just because it's a Shrieking Shack and it's haunted. But it's actually Snape under the invisibility cloak. So it's just really clever, and I much prefer that. So I hope they include that. It just adds a little bit more tension, a little bit more to that scene. And also in that scene, Snape is much more frantic. Like, he goes a little bit wild because he's finally confronted with, at the time, 2 of his high school bullies. He doesn't know about Pettigrew yet, so Sirius and Lupin, and he's like, yes, I can get revenge. All of that like childhood hate that he has that's built up over the years really comes to the surface, and he's really, really frantic, which I think is much less prevalent in the films. But I think it's really important because it gives even more insight into Snape as a character, gives us more clues, because we don't find out the full extent of his childhood and what he went through at school and everything until literally Deathly Hallows. But that little bit in Prisoner of Azkaban, when he's really frantic in the books, give us a bit of that inkling earlier on, a bit like, wow, he really hates them, why? So I hope they include that. Add some more question marks, but in a good way, to Snape. And then also, when in the films, Harry disarms Snape and he goes flying back, and it's always a little bit like, how did that happen? Why is it that, like, literally one little spell from Harry sends Snape flying back and knocks him unconscious? In the books, it makes much more sense. Harry, Ron, and Hermione each throw an Expelliarmus curse at him. They each go to disarm him at exactly the same time. So Snape has 3 of those curses hitting him at once, which is what knocks him back and makes him unconscious. It's that amazing, like, shock factor in the book of, oh my god, they all just attacked him, not just Harry. You know, you haven't got Hermione going, Harry, you just attacked the teacher. Like, no, she's in it with them. The 3 of them all attack him. And it's like, yes, they're in this together. And it's also like, damn, they really could have potentially, like, killed Snape then. So again, much higher stakes throughout that whole scene. So I hope that they include that. And then something else, this is a bit of an ongoing thing throughout Prisoner of Azkaban that's shown, is Crookshanks's attitude. We see in the films how, like, the extreme hate Crookshanks has for Peter Pettigrew, or aka Scabbers, and obviously at the time we don't know it's Peter Pettigrew. This is even more prevalent in the books. So Crookshanks really has like a vendetta against Scabbers. But not only this, but there's actually occasions where Crookshanks is seen to be really favourable of Sirius. So for example, a scene in the books that's missed out in the films is Harry looks out of his window one night, I think he can't sleep, he looks out his window and he sees Crookshanks in front of a dog, a massive dog that looks like the Grim. Harry's there thinking it's another omen. And it's like, oh my God. And Crookshanks is leading him. And it's sort of going towards the Whomping Willow. Harry looks away, clears his eyes because he thinks he's like envisioning stuff, looks back outside, they're gone. And then later on in the Shrieking Shack, when they're all being confronted and everything, Harry puts his wand to Sirius's chest. Basically, before he realises he's innocent, they're ready to kill him because in his current mind, he thinks Sirius betrayed his parents. And Crookshanks in the book gets on Sirius's chest and curls herself on Sirius's heart to protect him, which A, is just so cute, but it's also like, what? Why? And basically, there's this whole, it's just, I think it's mainly done to highlight in the books, like, Sirius is innocent, and it's showing that basically Crookshanks is a really magical cat, is clearly very clever and could see more than, like, humans can. The fact she could sense that Scabbers was not what he appeared to be, wasn't actually a rat, was something more than that, and sensed the disjustice that Sirius had been done, and could tell that this dog was actually Sirius as an animagus, and was basically realised his innocence. But what I like about this is the theories that it leads to. There are so many fan theories that have come from just these couple of scenes. And for example, there's fan theories that Crookshanks may have actually been the Potters' pet previously. Before they died, Crookshanks was Lily's cat. And that's why she had this hatred for Scabbers, because she knew it was Peter Pettigrew specifically, and knew what Peter Pettigrew had done to the Potters, and knew about the whole switching secret keeper, so therefore knew Sirius's innocence. Obviously, Sirius was James's best friend, James and Lily's best friend, so if Crookshanks was their pet, he would have been around Sirius a lot, probably loved him, and so therefore would have instantly recognised him as a dog and everything. So I love the whole Crookshanks is just having a higher ability anyway, that in itself, and sensing the bad in Scabbers and the good in Sirius. So I really, really hope they include that in the series for that extra building of it all. And it again gives clues and makes us raise questions of what's happening here, why is Crookshanks with this dog, all of that, and can allow us to piece together some things. But I love the fan theories that it leads to. And I think fan theories, predictions are what makes a series, a programme, a film, whatever it is, because it's what gets people talking after it. What gets people talking about it, discussing things, debating. And that's what HBO are going to want. They're going to want those discussions and for people to be talking about it after watching it. So I think it would really make sense for them to put in those little bits in the books that then enable viewers, when it's on the screen as a series, to create fan theories, predictions and everything. It's one of my all-time favourite Harry Potter fan theories about Crookshanks either being the Potter's old pet, or even there's theories that she is Lily, but she's an animagus and stayed like that for the rest of her life. There's also a fan theory that it's Regulus Black as an animagus. This is what I mean. There's so many theories just from Crookshanks and the way he acts. Sorry, I keep saying she. The way he acts in the books. So I really hope they include that in the series, because it leads to so many discussions. Also, actually, with Crookshanks as well, something else she does, but this is also actually a bigger point in itself that definitely needs to be included in the series, is how to calm down the Whomping Willow. So it shows Crookshanks going up to the Whomping Willow, touching his paw to the knot at the base of the trunk, because he's a cat, he's nimble and everything, he can run in between the flying branches, touch his paw to the knot like a knot of branches at the base of the tree, and that stops it. It stops the tree, it won't attack you, and you can go into the Whomping Willow safely to get to the Shrieking Shack. And this was done by the professors at Hogwarts, so that when Lupin had to go there, there was a way of getting into the shack safely. They could get into the shack safely, so he could be in there calm when the full moon was out, but it not being obvious how to calm it down, so that any students coming by wouldn't accidentally be able to get in there, calm the tree down. The tree needed to be aggressive and attack people in order to prevent students from going into the tree and stumbling across Lupin in his werewolf form. And that's explained in the books through Crookshanks touching the base of the tree. So then Sirius later explains, well, we became animagus so we could keep Lupin company, and also it meant that we were in a good form to do that. So Peter being the smallest, this shows his importance to the group. He was the smallest as a rat, so he was able to run in amongst the branches, not get hit, touch and calm down the tree for us so we could all go in. So all of that's so much more explained, which just makes more sense. That's not touched upon in the slightest in the films, which I think is a big plot hole, because how it raises this question of, well, how the teacher's expecting Lupin to get into the shack when he was a werewolf. Why did they just plant this tree that was really dangerous? So That in itself, major plot hole. I really hope they explained that in the HBO series. And I think it's just really clever anyway, adding that in. And I remember when I read that being like, makes sense. But also, I think generally the whole thing about why the Shrieking Shack was made, about why the Whomping Willow was made, it's not, I don't think it's properly explained in the film. It's explained to an extent that it's there for Lupin, but I don't think it's fully explained. And they definitely then don't explain why all the Marauders turned themselves into animagus to keep Lupin company. They don't explain, well, no, the Shrieking Shack isn't actually haunted. What they could actually hear was Lupin's howls when he was a werewolf, that they formed this story in order to put off students from going there so they wouldn't stumble across Lupin. Like, all of that, just not explained properly at all, whereas in the book we have a proper in-depth explanation of it, and it all makes so much more sense. So yeah, I really hope they give full explanation to that in the series. Next, so the rest of the events are sort of similar. We come to the same conclusion. I think I sort of explained the main differences, like in the Shrieking Shack and everything. But then they come out of the Shrieking Shack. Now, firstly, in the films, they leave Snape behind in the shack, and then he comes out later and is like, oh, what's going on? In the books, what actually happens is, I believe it's Lupin or Sirius. I think it's Lupin. No, I think it's Sirius. It's Sirius. Leviosas him up. He makes him float up and to like lead him out of the tunnel to get out the Whomping Willow. And it's quite funny because Harry comments, he's like, oh yeah, Sirius doesn't pay attention or just sort of ignores the fact that Snape's head keeps bumping the top of the like tunnel, which is quite funny. And then Lupin and Ron are ahead with Peter Pettigrew tied to them. The Crookshanks is leading the way, Hermione, and then everything like that. And you get a really nice moment with Sirius and Harry chatting. Now, we also get this moment in the films, but we get a little bit more in the book. So one of the biggest things that's missed out is Sirius actually explains in the books how he escaped Azkaban. This is completely missed out in the films. It's just like, yeah, Sirius escaped. Never explain why. They just say, yeah, never done before, impossible to do, and yet Sirius does it. Which obviously leaves a huge question to everyone. Well then, how did he manage it? If it's impossible, it's clearly not impossible. If Sirius managed it, so how? And we get an answer to that in the books. The reason Sirius was able to escape is because Dementors can only sense sort of emotions and feelings, and humans. Dementors can't see, they can only sort of sense, and they only know human minds. That's what they know best. See, the reason why Sirius was able to escape is because usually in Azkaban, prisoners lose their mind. They go crazy, so even if they had their door wide open with the opportunity to escape, they probably wouldn't be able to do it because their mind's sort of gone, they wouldn't be able to actually think it through and do it. But basically, because Sirius was an animagus and was able to turn into a dog, he would basically turn back and forth from human to dog, which enabled him to keep his sanity, or most of it. He still obviously went a little bit like, oh, but he mainly kept the majority of his mind and his sanity because he could stay as a dog. And what happened was, he was sort of content to stay there. He said that he believed he deserved to be there because even though he didn't betray Lily and James and was actually innocent, in his mind he felt himself as guilty because he made them switch to the Secret Keeper as Peter Pettigrew, which then, he then betrayed them. So he felt responsible for Lily and James's death, even though it wasn't directly his fault. He felt that by not being their Secret Keeper, he was responsible for it. So he was willing to stay in Azkaban because he believed he deserved to be there because he was so destroyed by what happened to James and Lily, which in itself is like, oh my god, Sirius, breaks my heart. But then basically, I think it was the Minister of Magic, visited Azkaban, and he had a newspaper, and Sirius saw on the front of the newspaper a picture of the Weasleys in Egypt, and he recognised something in there. So he asked the Minister if he could borrow the paper. The Minister said yes, gave Sirius the paper. Sirius looked at it, and in the picture was Scabbers, who he instantly recognised as Peter Pettigrew, just from the picture on the paper, saying the Weasleys had won a competition, were in Egypt. We see the poster in the films. Sirius recognised from that Scabbers was there, so knew he was with Ron, and was like, oh my god, I found him. It says Ron, this boy who's in this picture, who's holding Scabbers, is going back to Hogwarts in September. So that's when Sirius is like, right, I have to go to Hogwarts and find him. If, I've just seen him, this is my opportunity to find Scabbers and basically avenge James and Lily. Sirius didn't know Ron would be so close to Harry. He didn't know that. That just ended up being a bit of a happy coincidence in the end, that it also led him to Harry. But yeah, so that's what happened. And then the way he escaped was when the Dementors came to give him food, because they can't see, Dementors are blind, they can only feel emotions and like feel minds, they can like sense human minds. But Sirius was in his dog form, so they couldn't sense him or quick enough. They couldn't like really gauge what was there or who was there quick enough, because they can't read like an animal's mind as well. So Sirius, when they came to give him his food, he turned into his dog form and slipped out, just slipped out and left. And by the time they realised he was gone, it was too late, because they were slower to catch up to that sensing he was gone because he was in his dog form. And so, yeah, they did eventually notice, but it was too late. He was gone. Really clever and not explained at all in the films. And I think it is so key. It's so interesting. I loved finding that out in the books. It's so like clever. It's such a clever plot point and storyline. And I really, really hope they include that in the HBO series. I think it's so important and just so interesting. And also including that, a bit about Sirius, the fact he kept himself there. It's like, oh, Sirius like adds to his character. And then that sort of really clever bit again about what made him finally want to escape. Like, why did he escape then? In the films, it's just like, that's interesting timing, that he's just suddenly decided to escape and everything. But in the books, it's explained of why it happened then, at that time and everything. It's because there was that picture in the paper with the Weasleys, Sirius spotted Scabbers, and so decided, right, this is my opportunity to go and find him. I have the information I need, so off I go. Also, with the whole Secret Keeper stuff, they really don't make that very clear. They do briefly mention it, but I don't really think they go into the details about what exactly happened with the Secret Keeper stuff and Sirius telling them to use Pettigrew. They really don't explain that properly. It's sort of very much just brushed over, whereas in the book it's given more attention and detail. So I hope they go into much more detail about that in the series, maybe even doing a little flashback. Because something else that's included in the books but not in the films is Hagrid explains that when he went to rescue Harry on the night everything happened, Sirius turned up. Sirius turned up at James and Lily's house after hearing what had happened on his bike and is like, oh my god, and then offers Hagrid his bike, and that is how Hagrid gets his famous bike. It's literally said, yeah, it's Sirius's bike, but it's never explained or anything like that. It's just, yeah, but in the books, it's again these extra things explained that even in the films we might not realise we need an explanation for, but when we get an explanation in the book, it's like, oh, well, that just makes it all so much better and so much more clear. Yeah, Sirius actually turned up on the night James and Lily died, which again is like, oh, Sirius, he went to try and get them and save them, but was too late. And then he tries to do whatever he could to help, which was, well, he actually initially asked to take Harry. He said to Hagrid, look, I'll take him. I can take him. I'm his godfather. And Hagrid's like, no, I've got Dumbledore's orders. Before we learn about Sirius's innocence, Hagrid's there like, oh my god, imagine if I'd given him over and everything. But yeah, and then Hagrid's like, no, I'll take him. But Sirius is like, that's fine, but at least take my bike. You'll get there quicker. So it's like, oh, it's really nice learning that like Sirius was there on the night everything happened. He tried to help in whatever way he could. He tried to help even more, but Hagrid had orders and everything. I think it makes sense as well. Like, of course Sirius would go and try to help. Of course he would rush there to his best friend's aid as soon as he heard it. Like, it just makes sense. And it upsets me that they just missed that out in the films. So I hope they include that in the TV reboot. So next we're going to look into when they start to go back in time. So firstly, one of the sort of main scenes in the films when they go back in time is Harry and Hermione hide behind the pumpkins and then they throw the stones into Hagrid's hut to try and remind their old self to leave. Now, I always actually liked this in the films because it's a bit that you can actually, like, you see the first time round, you don't know what it means, and then you understand it later when you see them go back in time. So I always did actually quite like that in the films. However, that doesn't happen in the book. There's none of that throwing the stones. And even though I liked it in the films because it enabled you to have more, it did give some realisation and like, wow, that makes sense as to why that happened, and it's actually quite clever. And when you rewatch it, you look back to see if you can see them in the background and stuff like that. The reason why actually, so in the books it doesn't happen, and the reason why actually the HBO series should probably stay true to that, firstly, because again, like, as I keep mentioning, if they don't do these things differently, then what's the point in it? But also because it actually goes against everything else that Hermione says. So Hermione makes a huge point about how careful they need to be when time travelling, about how much can be impacted and affected and how much can go wrong if they interfere with their old self. And then literally she's there throwing stones at her past self. Like, it doesn't make sense, and it's a little bit of a just inconsistency there. It's like she's preaching one thing and telling Harry one thing, but then doing something different, and that's not very in keeping with Hermione's character. She is all for breaking the rules when necessary and to save people, but when it's something like time travel, she is so careful with it that whole stone throwing thing just doesn't make sense. My microphone's just decided it doesn't want to work anymore, so we're just going to have to do the rest without the microphone. So apologies about the audio quality change that's probably just happened. So it just doesn't make sense, and it's really inconsistent. So in the series, I hope that they stay true to what happens in the books and they don't add that in. Because yeah, that was something the film added in, that whilst I actually did enjoy it in the films, it does actually create some inconsistencies mainly in Hermione's character, but just generally in like what they're preaching about time travel and stuff. It doesn't make sense. So I hope this HBO series don't copy the films there and just stay true to the books. Something else that's different is in the films, Harry and Hermione draw Lupin away from other Harry and Hermione by Hermione howling. She howls to capture Lupin's attention. He then runs into the forest and they're like, oh, I didn't think that through. That doesn't happen in the books. She doesn't howl or anything. They just sit in the forest and wait. They literally just sat there waiting for things to happen. And again, even though I don't think this matters too much because it's just her howling, it does, again, though, have a similar sort of point to what I was saying about the stone throwing, where it creates those inconsistencies. Hermione's saying about not interrupting or getting involved in things, and then there she is literally impacting the events of what happens. So yeah, that's, again, I think it's a similar point to that stone throwing one. It's something the film's added in, but it actually does create some inconsistencies because it goes against what other stuff Hermione said and all the rules about time travel. Another little difference when Harry is at the lake and he's saving Sirius, so he conjures the Patronus and everything. Hermione's not there. She's actually in Hagrid's hut with Buckbeak. She takes Buckbeak there and hides there while Harry is at the lake figuring out how to save Sirius and then coming to the realisation about the Patronus being his and not his dad. So that's just a little difference. I don't really think it's like a major anything that really changes what happens. I think it's good in the books that he comes to all those realizations by himself. He doesn't have Hermione there being like, come on Harry, he's not coming, or anything like that. It's just Harry by himself at the lake coming to terms with everything by himself, which I think makes sense with the Prisoner of Azkaban book. As I explained in a previous episode, Harry really goes through the emotions in that book. It really is portrayed in there, the sort of roller coaster he goes on, the anger, upset, everything he experiences, and how he just feels like everyone's almost just coddling him, everything like that. And I think the fact at the end of the book he comes to that realization, almost saves Sirius and sort of saves himself at the lake himself. It's not Hermione there, he's there on his own and figures it out alone, I think is actually quite key and shows that he's capable and strong enough to deal with these things. It doesn't, obviously Hermione and Ron help him throughout all the films and books and everything, but I think it shows how strong he is in his own right. So that might be looking into it a little bit deeply, but I just think, you know, it maybe does, I think it does have that sort of slightly bigger meaning. So yeah, again, I just hope they stick true to the books, and if anything, just so we have that difference, because if they're doing this reboot, it needs to be different. It can't just be a copy for the film. So even if they just they just change that and have it being just Harry and Hermione back in Hagrid's hut as it is in the books, just so that we can have that difference and really have everything being true exactly to the books. Another little difference is the way in which they save Sirius. So in the films he's in like a tower somewhere, whereas in the books he's actually in Flitwick's office, and Hermione uses Alohomora to let him out instead of Bombarda, which actually leads to a potential plot hole in the films by her using Bombarda, because it's a higher level spell that they actually wouldn't know at that stage, and it's also just unnecessary. You don't need to explode the door, you can just unlock it. That would be fine. You can just Alohomora it. That would be absolutely fine. You don't need to cause an explosion, Hermione. You're attracting way too much attention to yourself there. So I think the way it happens in the book just makes much more sense. In the French adaptation of the films, they actually do stick to the Alohomora as it is in the books. They don't use Bombarda. Fun fact thrown in there. We are At the end of Prisoner of Azkaban in the book, we get the explanation about everything with the time turner, about McGonagall being the one to give it to Hermione, and also how she got it. So McGonagall saying, yeah, had to get special approval from the ministry, and having that extra explanation makes it much more clear to the reader that, you know, how seriously time travel is considered, that McGonagall didn't just hand it over to Hermione, which does sort of feel like that in the films. It feels a bit like, you know, they just handed it over to a student, a third-year student. Like, no, it was a little bit more, it did take a little bit more than that. They had to get approval. It was actually taken seriously. It had a lot of thought behind it. It wasn't just handed to her. And Hogwarts don't just have loads lying around. This is the only one they had. The rest are all like literally locked up in the ministry. It gives much more explanation to that and to the severity of time travel, how seriously these cases are taken, and that it's not something they give out lightly, and how rare the time turners are as well. That's all much more explained. Pigwidgeon is missed out in the films completely, and I think Pigwidgeon's so cute. It's basically a little owl that Ron gets. So at the end of Prisoner of Azkaban in the books, they are on the train on the way home back to King's Cross, and an owl flies towards Ron and Harry's carriage. I think Hermione's in there as well, and they're like, oh, so they let it in the carriage, and it's there. It drops a parcel, drops a note on Harry's lap, and then flies really excited, like buzzing around the carriage. And Harry reads the letter, and it's from Sirius, and he's like, sorry, I couldn't use Hedwig because she'd have captured too much attention, so I just got this little one because no one would suspect it. And that's where he tells Harry that he was the one who gave him the firebolt. And he just says, like, you know, me and Buckbeak are safe, hidden away where no one will find us, but I do hope to eventually see you again. We just need to let things die down a bit. And he says, also, I thought as Ron, your friend, lost his pet, I thought maybe he could keep Pigwidgeon, and that could be his new pet, which is so sweet. I love that, like, serious thinking, not only of Harry, but of his friends as well. And Ron getting a new pet. You know, he's lost Scabbers, but now he has his own owl. And even though Ron's like, oh my God, I got this little owl, you can tell he's really happy about it. And Pigwidgeon's so cute. It's like literally this tiny owl that can barely carry like the weight of anything. And there's some funny things later on in future books of Pigwidgeon, of like Hedwig having to carry him, and like Hedwig sharing his cage with him, and it's just really sweet. So yeah, I really want them to include that. There is actually like a promo shot of Ron with Pigwidgeon, but I find it really funny. Like it was so they intended potentially to include it a bit in the films, but they didn't. But there's just this random promo shot, but there's no explanation or no context as to who or what that owl is. Just Ron has a random owl that we've never seen before, which is quite funny. I love that. So I hope Pigwidgeon gets included in the Harry Potter TV series. Then right at the end of Prisoner of Azkaban, in the books, we get a scene with Harry and the Dursleys. So Harry gets to King's Cross, the Dursleys are there waiting for him, like eyeing up the Weasleys like, oh, they're being weird. And then Harry goes up and is like, oh yeah, you know, that mass murderer that we're going loose and everything. Yeah, well, he is my godfather. We're besties, all this sort of thing. And it makes the Dursleys scared of him, and it's like a brilliant, like, yes, Harry, you tell them. And it's like something he can sort of hold against them, being like, you know, you've got to be nice to me this summer because my godfather's a murderer. Obviously not, but he just doesn't tell them. Makes them believe that he is this bad person that he's portrayed to be, so that the Dursleys might cut him a bit of slack over the summer. But I love that. It's such a good way to like end, especially with the way Prisoner of Azkaban started, with everything with Marge, the way she treated him, and him running out on everything. It's like, yeah, like it just makes sense. Because also, sorry, something else that I didn't actually mention, I probably should have mentioned before, is after everything with Marge and then Harry running away, the Dursleys were like, no, we don't want him back. We don't want to look after him anymore. We can't take him back. But obviously Dumbledore can't allow that to happen because of the protection. So he basically sends them, while Harry's at Hogwarts, Dumbledore, and I think the Minister of Magic go to the Dursleys or contact them and are like, yeah, no, you have to let him in. I don't know how they persuade him exactly, but they persuade the Dursleys and they're like, yeah, you have to let him back. You haven't got a choice, basically. So yeah, that is everything for Prisoner of Azkaban. There was a lot in there. And I think Prisoner of Azkaban is really where we start to learn a lot of like key pivotal things. It's where things start to get serious. And, you know, it's the start of Voldemort coming back because Peter Pettigrew is now out in the wild looking for him. So it's a really pivotal turning point, really. and from then on things actually do start to get quite a bit darker. But yes, there was loads to go through there, but I think there's real potential for Prisoner of Azkaban to be really good. I think with the HBO series, I think the first 2 seasons, they should really, like the films, try and make them really magical, really get us stuck into Hogwarts life, student life, building relationships, a lot more of that setup, building the Hogwarts world, the wizarding world. So then from sort of Prisoner of Azkaban, or even halfway through Prisoner of Azkaban onwards, is when they can really start to higher the stakes and ramp everything up. Like, I think that would make the most sense. And also it'd probably start to get a little bit more confusing then, because there'd be more storylines, more plots, more questions and everything, but we'd actually get all the answers to them in the series, whereas in the films we don't get all the answers to everything. But yeah, I really hope you enjoyed episode 7. If you did, please give this video a huge thumbs up. It means the absolute world. And let me know in the comments if there's anything that you think I've missed out from Prisoner of Azkaban, that you think was missed out in the films, that you want them to include in the series. Please let me know in the comments. And with any of the books, films, the ones we've already gone through or upcoming, anything you want them to include in the series, let me know, because I'm going to be collating all of your opinions together and including it in the podcast. I'm going to do a whole episode dedicated to going through what you guys think. If you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the future episodes. There's a new episode every Sunday on YouTube and on Spotify. Don't forget as well to follow me on TikTok, because I post 3 videos every single day with different theories and everything, so make sure you're following me over there. Also streaming currently on Twitch. I'm playing Hogwarts Legacy, so if you want to join and be a part of that, then go and check out my channel. All the channel links will be in my bio, so you can very easily find them. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next week.